With the announcement of Azur Promilia happening in the last 24 hours, kind of left me thinking, the genre is on a weird trajectory right now. With the release of Genshin Impact back in 2020, the genre was shaken to its very foundation. Genshin's release forced the genre to undergo a colossal shift, and has since dominated every aspect of the genre. Earnings, downloads, social media presence. But it looks like 2024, 4 years after Genshin's release, we're about to see another shift, perhaps even larger than the first. And that is all thanks to Genshin setting a new standard, forcing studios to up their game and produce higher quality titles. Today, I want to talk about several upcoming gacha games releasing over the next year that could very well lead to Genshin forfeiting its crown as the #1 gacha game. Before we jump in though, I do want to take a moment here to remind you, do not forget to subscribe to this channel. Hit the little bell notification. That way you remain up to date with every single thing that I post. I post every single day. New releases, pre-registrations, beta tests, juicy drama. I cover it all. Now let's talk gacha, beginning with Azur Promilia. Azur Promilia is actually being developed by the same studio that produces Azur Lane. Azur Lane is one of the most free-to-play friendly gacha games in the world. I think there is maybe one, maybe two other gacha games that I've played that offer as many free units, as many methods of obtaining free units that Azur Lane does. I'm genuinely hoping Azur Promilia offers us that same level of generosity. Azur Promilia, however, is an open world gacha game, anime aesthetic, absolutely beautiful. This game looks contrastingly different to Wuthering Waves and to various other gacha games in this list. I feel like Azur Promilia took inspiration from Palworld, from various aspects. The graphical style, the world, the environment looks very similar to Genshin. I think it looks like a higher texture version of Genshin. I think Azur Promilia has a beautiful world, has very different character models. I think they took a very different approach to Wuthering Waves and Genshin and Tower of Fantasy. I love the fact that they have very different looking, very fantasy looking and feeling character models. It has incredible looking action combat, perfect dodges, fast fluid movements, elemental affinities, although the elemental affinities are directly linked to the pets that you equip onto each individual character. You can have 3 different characters. Each character has their own unique weapon, their own unique fighting style. I'm not sure if the gacha is going to pertain to the pets and the characters. That'd make it quite a bit more difficult to get the right characters to synergize properly between one another, given if you're being presented with dozens of characters and dozens of pets and you're having to use your currency for one or the other, you're going to be sacrificing one or the other. It seems as though there is a creature collection mechanic, meaning you can go out, capture eggs. I don't know if you can breed monsters or not like Palworld. You can ride mounts, you can soar the skies. There's no gliding, there's really no need for gliding since you're gonna have aerial mounts. Everything about this game screams innovative for gacha. Anyway, this game, from what I'm aware of, is releasing onto PC, Android, iOS, and PS5, which means there's gonna be a lot of crossplay functionality. Since we talked about Wuthering Waves, let's just jump directly into Wuthering Waves. Wuthering Waves is generally considered to be the biggest Genshin clone. I don't personally think it is. I played both the global beta tests. I think it is a contrastingly different game, but I know people are going to automatically make that comparison between the two. Wuthering Waves is a beautiful, kind of darker aesthetic anime RPG featuring a darker story, featuring more messed up characters and events, featuring a world that isn't necessarily as bright, vibrant, and lively. Instead, the world, while it does have some incredibly beautiful zones, is a little bit more destroyed, is a little bit more post-apocalyptic, and also a little bit less fantasy. This game has what is arguably the best action combat in the entire genre, with the exception being Punishing Grey Raven. But I mean, there are people that think Wuthering Waves is better combat, and vice versa. You'll have to be the judge of that. From what I played of Wuthering Waves, it was an incredibly fun game. Still had some flaws, but I think it is different enough to Genshin to have its own identity, but similar enough to Genshin to warrant players who are bored with Genshin migrating over to play it. Now, before we talk about any additional games, let me take a moment here to thank our incredible patrons over on Patreon who allow for me to continue to do dedicated videos like this every single day. You guys are phenomenal, and I cannot thank you all enough for the support. Another game that is actually quite drastically different to Genshin is Project Mugen. Project Mugen is closer to, I guess, Zenless Zone Zero in terms of theme. It has an urban setting, kind of set in like a modern day. It's not a sprawling fantasy world with fantasy-looking characters. It does feature action combat, although it looks and feels very different to both Genshin and Wuthering Waves. You do have characters with swords, spears, but I feel like it has a larger emphasis on more modern weapons. There are guns, cannons, plasma rifles, stuff like that. Since it does have a more modern setting, there are cars, motorcycles, bikes. It does have a unique traversal method, and that is essentially swinging through the streets like in the more recent Spider-Man game. A lot of people have made reference to that. That doesn't make it any less insane to look at, especially in terms of it being a gacha game. The world itself is apparently being procedurally generated. The devs confirmed that they are using AI to populate the world, and then they are recrafting it or touching it up, which is admittedly an interesting way of creating a world. Another game that's doing that is Wang Yue. The devs of Wang Yue confirmed that all of the side quests in the game are going to be AI generated, which means that these events, these quests, these characters are going to be generated based on where you are, based on what you're doing, based on whether you've seen, talked, or engaged with them before. I think that is a very interesting way of handling content, because it means that content is going to constantly be evolving. You're not going to have the same like 40 different side quests or daily quests that you run through every single day. Instead, you're going to get new dynamic quests and dynamic events that are happening, spawning as you play the game. The more you invest time into learning and getting to know the different characters. Now, Wang Yue is another open world anime RPG that features action combat. It also features the ability to craft your own mount from scratch using parts you find around in the world. Like, you can literally take dumpsters, some rooftops from a house, some tree trunks. You can get fans out of a person's room and just attach everything together, turn it into an aircraft, turn it into a car. Like, the options from what I've seen in the gameplay footage are limitless. This is a very unique, very interesting take on the genre, and I am kind of excited to see where it goes. Another game that isn't necessarily doing anything drastically different, but is still incredibly high quality, is Arknights Endfield. Arknights Endfield is another action combat open world anime RPG. However, where all the other games are disconnected from any other franchise, Arknights Endfield is directly connected to Arknights. It features some of the same characters. It features connections to other characters. This game looks beautiful, by the way. The character models look very different to Genshin. The world looks very different to Genshin. Exploration is handled very differently to Genshin. You have a type of base and resource management. The story, from what I've seen in the test phase, was actually pretty good. Like, this game is very different to the current Arknights game. I think this is going to be a very different game to Genshin, but is also simultaneously going to appeal to players that are looking for something similar, but that isn't necessarily identical. Duet Night Abyss is an interesting game because while what we're led to believe is it's an open world game, but we haven't directly seen much in terms of actual action combat. We're told it's an action game. We've seen gunfighters, we've seen cannon fighters, we've seen rifle fighters, we've seen a lot of long range units, but very little in terms of sword fighters, spear fighters, magic users. Now, from what we've seen, the gameplay actually looks insane. I haven't seen any kind of like third-person shooter combat like this present in any gacha game. And if they handle third-person shooting this well, I can only imagine what they're gonna do with close-range melee combat. The graphical style in Duet Night Abyss is also very different to Genshin. The characters look more grown-up, more adult, I think. They're taller, more stretched out. The world, again, is very bright, very vibrant. This is a beautiful game. I know people have made comparisons to Warframe, and those comparisons are very warranted. A closed beta is actually happening very soon. I'm hoping I get into that. I'm hoping I get to stream that and get to see what the actual gameplay is like so I can verify whether I should be as excited as I am for this. Xunjing is an open world third-person shooter. I know, those are very rare, and by very rare, I mean there is not a single open world third-person shooter anime RPG gacha game right now. A trailer was released for this game just like last week. I did a dedicated video on it. It looks really good. Like, this looks very different, very, very different to Genshin, to Wuthering Waves, to Azur Promilia, to every other game in this list. This looks like Nier Automata, but as a third-person shooter. This looks like what Snowbreak should have been if it were an open-world game and had a larger budget. Now, very little is known about this game yet, as they literally just announced it, but man, looking at the third-person action gameplay, looking at the various environments, this is a very good-looking game. I am incredibly excited to see where they go with this, because I think open-world third-person shooters are a very untapped subgenre right now. Unending Dawn is what is described as a Souls-like open-world action RPG, and admittedly we've only ever seen one single character in the trailer that was released. Now the gameplay looks really good, not as polished as something like Wuthering Waves or Azur Promilia, but it is still in the early stages of development. The trailer was, I think, released over a year ago. I'm hoping a test phase is coming for it soon. We really don't have much information other than that one single like 6-minute trailer, but from what we've seen, the world looks pretty good, very dark. The combat looks very good. The monsters look kind of cool. And Souls-like gacha games are also a genre, a subgenre that doesn't really have anything occupying it right now. And finally, there is Jiuji Qifeng Journey. This is a game that I think nobody has covered other than me. And I don't know why, this game was beautiful. Although this is probably the most Genshin clone here. Not only do a lot of the characters look like Genshin clones, not only do some of the areas look like they were literally ripped and then just slightly altered from Genshin Impact, but if you didn't tell me that it wasn't Genshin, I'd probably say it was. Now that isn't bad, because Genshin kind of did that with Breath of the Wild. A lot of people made the same assumptions, but I think Jiuji can actually establish its own identity if they try hard enough. It just looks and feels very Genshin right now. Now, we don't really know anything about this game other than it is an open world action game. From what we've seen from the single trailer, the characters look beautiful, the graphics look beautiful, the world looks beautiful, and that is because it looks and feels just like Genshin. And that is okay. Again, that is perfectly fine. Now, these are 9 gacha games that are all relatively similar to Genshin Impact, but different and unique in their own ways, that are all coming out over the course of the next year or two. I think at the very least there is going to be one game in this list of 9 that is going to challenge and potentially defeat Genshin Impact, claiming the #1 title, claiming the top spot as the king of gacha games. Or maybe it won't, I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. Now, if none of these games are of any interest to you, then you are absolutely insane, because this is pretty much what the genre, the best that the genre has to offer going into the next year or two. But I have you covered with 2 different videos on screen right now that I guess might be of more interest to you.